On July 12, 1943, as smoke still rose from the shattered fields of Kursk, the Soviet Union did more than simply survive. They unleashed a devastating response that would signal the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany in the east. While the Wehrmacht struggled to comprehend their catastrophic losses at Kursk, Soviet generals were already planning their next crushing blows. The stunning Soviet triumph at the Battle of Kursk, widely regarded as the largest armored engagement in history, had bled the German war machine dry, shattering both its equipment and its confidence. The Germans had sacrificed a staggering 500 tanks and roughly 70,000 soldiers, leaving them scrambling into tactical withdrawal. Meanwhile, Soviet commanders, energized by their defensive triumph, were carefully crafting their counteroffensives. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, alongside his fellow Soviet commanders, recognized that the battered German forces presented a golden opportunity to shift from defense to attack. The immediate aftermath of Kursk saw the Soviets developing not one, but a series of synchronized offensives designed to exploit the fractured German lines. Plans for Operations Kutuzov and Rumyantsev were activated, targeting critical German-held positions that would cripple their ability to launch any future major offensive. Operation Kutuzov, named after the legendary Russian Field Marshal Mikhail Kutuzov, who had outmaneuvered Napoleon back in 1812, commenced on July 12, 1943, directly north of Kursk. Its objective was the Orel region, where the German Ninth Army had been savaged but not yet destroyed. Soviet forces comprising the Bryansk, Western and Central fronts were ordered to encircle and annihilate the German forces around Orel. The operation mobilized over 1.3 million soldiers, 2,500 tanks and 2,000 aircraft, demonstrating the Soviet capacity to concentrate massive resources with remarkable speed. Running parallel to Operation Kutuzov was Operation Rumyantsev, striking the area south of Kursk and primarily targeting the city of Belgorod. Launched on August 3, 1943, this offensive was spearheaded by the Voronezh Front under General Nikolai Vatutin and the Steppe Front, commanded by Ivan Konev. Their objective was unmistakable: recapture Belgorod and Kharkov, thereby shattering the southern flank of the German forces. The ferocity of the Soviet assault, reinforced by overwhelming artillery and air support, drove the Germans into chaotic retreat. They liberated Belgorod on August 5th and Kharkov by August 23rd. The triumph of these offensives extended beyond mere territorial conquest. They forced the German armies into a permanent defensive posture for the remainder of the war. The strategic brilliance of Soviet planning after Kursk was evident in how these operations were choreographed. Every strike was calculated to hit where the Germans were most vulnerable, and the timing was precisely coordinated to prevent any German regrouping. The Soviet High Command, including commanders like Alexander Vasilevsky and Konstantin Rokossovsky, synchronized these massive offensives, ensuring an uninterrupted flow of troops and materiel. This strategic sophistication reflected lessons painfully learned from earlier devastating encounters with the Wehrmacht. As the Red Army advanced through territories once occupied by the Germans, countless first-hand accounts from Soviet soldiers captured the stark contrast between the grim early days of the war and the now unmistakable scent of victory. One moving account from a Red Army officer described the moment they liberated a village near Kharkov. He recalled the overwhelming joy and relief on civilians' faces, set against the visible scars of brutal German occupation. With the stage prepared and German forces reeling, the Soviet military launched two decisive operations. Operation Kutuzov and Operation Rumyantsev not only reclaimed vital territories, but inflicted irreparable damage to the German war machine on the Eastern Front. The relentless advance of the Red Army, powered by strategic genius and extraordinary valor, transformed these operations from mere military successes into genuine turning points in the Great Patriotic War. This dramatic shift not only devastated German forces, but ignited renewed determination in the Soviet war effort, setting the stage for the ultimate march toward Berlin. Operation Kutuzov, launched on July 12, 1943, was a decisive Soviet offensive aimed at seizing the strategic city of Orel and dismantling the Wehrmacht's offensive capabilities. Named after the legendary Russian Field Marshal Mikhail Kutuzov, the operation was engineered to exploit German forces weakened and distracted by their offensive at Kursk. The city of Orel was critical due to its position as a major railway junction, making it the linchpin of German supply and communication networks. The offensive erupted with a colossal artillery barrage involving over 3,000 guns and mortars, which hammered German defensive positions surrounding Orel. This initial bombardment was designed not only to shatter German lines, but also to drown out the rumble of tank engines, as the Soviet 11th Guards Army under Lieutenant General Hovhannes Bagramian maneuvered into striking position. The precision and intensity of Soviet artillery during Operation Kutuzov is widely credited with breaking the fighting spirit of German troops stationed in the sector. As the artillery fire lifted, Soviet armored and infantry divisions surged forward. Battle-hardened troops advanced through the smoldering wreckage of the front lines, engaging in brutal close-quarters combat with surviving German defenders. Among these soldiers was Sergeant Yakov Pavlov, who later described the relentless push of his platoon despite devastating losses. "Every step forward cost us blood," Pavlov recalled, "but we understood that liberating Orel would shift the balance across the entire region." Pavlov's testimony captures the fierce determination that drove Red Army soldiers during this critical phase of the war. The Soviet forces employed a combination of deep battle tactics, where they penetrated far behind enemy lines to disrupt rear areas, and shock tactics, which concentrated overwhelming force at weak points in German defenses. This approach enabled them to encircle and isolate large concentrations of German troops. By July 26th, the Soviets had successfully surrounded and severed the German Ninth Army, inflicting catastrophic casualties and forcing them into disorganized retreat. A particularly stirring personal account from the front lines involves Captain Maria Oktyabrskaya, who joined the fight to avenge her husband killed by the Germans. She sold her possessions to purchase a T-34 tank, which she christened Fighting Girlfriend, and participated in some of the most savage battles of Operation Kutuzov. Her courage and skill in commanding her tank became legendary among her comrades, embodying the deeply personal stakes that many Soviet soldiers carried into combat. By August 5th, the Red Army had recaptured Orel, marking the first major city to be liberated following the German invasion. The victory at Orel represented more than a tactical triumph. It dealt a profound psychological blow to the Nazis, proving that Soviet forces could not merely defend, but could reclaim their homeland with devastating effectiveness. The liberation of Orel compelled German command to fundamentally reassess their strategies and signaled a decisive shift in momentum on the Eastern Front. As Operation Kutuzov drove the Germans back in the north, to the south, another Soviet force was preparing a strike of equal devastation. This imminent assault, known as Operation Rumyantsev, aimed to liberate the city of Kharkov, creating a multi-front crisis that German forces would find increasingly impossible to contain. Together, these operations demonstrated the growing power and coordination of Soviet military efforts, establishing a relentless tempo that would eventually carry them all the way to Berlin. As the smoke cleared on the battered Eastern Front, Operation Rumyantsev erupted on August 3, 1943, signaling a ferocious Soviet counterattack aimed at recapturing Belgorod and Kharkov. Led by the Voronezh and Steppe fronts, commanded by generals Nikolai Vatutin and Ivan Konev respectively, This operation proved essential in reversing the war's trajectory in Soviet favor. The operation opened with a thunderous artillery barrage from over 1,000 guns that pulverized German positions, creating a symphony of destruction that announced the advance of nearly 2 million Soviet troops. The initial phase of the operation featured savage combat as the Red Army encountered deeply entrenched German forces. Soviet tanks, including the legendary T-34s and the massive KV-1 heavy tanks, rolled forward under the cover of screaming Katyusha rocket launchers. German defenses collapsed under this combined arms onslaught, showcasing Soviet mastery of mobile warfare. By August 5th, Belgorod was liberated, marking the operation's first major victory. The city's recapture wasn't simply a territorial gain, but a devastating blow to the morale of German Army Group South. Attention then shifted to Kharkov. The Soviets implemented encirclement tactics refined through previous battles. Multiple infantry and armored units executed pincer movements around the city, squeezing German forces into an ever-tightening vice. Beginning August 12th, intense urban warfare engulfed Kharkov, with house-to-house fighting becoming standard. Soviet soldiers, many fighting to liberate their own homeland, displayed remarkable bravery and resilience. One haunting account comes from Sergeant Mikhail Petrov, who recalled, "Every building was a fortress, every window a sniper's nest, but our resolve was unbreakable. We fought for every inch with blood and fury." By August 23rd, after grueling combat and substantial losses on both sides, Kharkov finally fell to Soviet control. The city's liberation stood as a testament to Soviet endurance and tactical brilliance, characterized by the effective deployment of sniper teams and combat engineers who methodically cleared paths through dense minefields laid by retreating German forces. The fall of Kharkov delivered a decisive blow to the Wehrmacht, critically weakening their grip on the Eastern Front. The success of Operation Rumyantsev stemmed not solely from the courage of the troops, but also from the strategic genius of Soviet command. The integration of infantry, armor, and air support demonstrated how dramatically Soviet military tactics had evolved since the catastrophic early days of Operation Barbarossa. With over 70,000 German casualties and crucial territories recovered, the operation underscored the shifting momentum. The Red Army's capacity to adapt and innovate was becoming unmistakably clear to allies and enemies alike. The impact of these victories reached far beyond immediate tactical advantages. With Belgorod and Kharkov restored to Soviet control, the Red Army had not only recovered vital territory, but had inflicted irreversible damage to German strategic positioning in the east. This operation cleared the path for future Soviet advances and established the broader strategic transformation that would ultimately lead to Nazi Germany's destruction. The recapture of these key cities was celebrated throughout the Soviet Union as proof of resilience and a harbinger of ultimate victory, inspiring the imagination and strengthening the morale of the Soviet people. With decisive victories at Belgorod and Kharkov, the Soviet offensives not only reclaimed critical territories, but established the foundation for a broader strategic transformation. This shift would continue building momentum, propelling Soviet forces westward and marking the beginning of the end for Nazi presence in Eastern Europe. The success of Operations Kutuzov and Rumyantsev not only recovered territory, but demonstrated the growing might and resilience of the Red Army. By August 1943, momentum on the Eastern Front had shifted irreversibly. The Wehrmacht, previously considered an unstoppable force, sustained catastrophic losses. In Operation Kutuzov alone, the Germans lost approximately 200,000 men, a stark contrast to the 70,000 casualties suffered by the Soviets. This operation, aimed at relieving pressure on the Kursk salient, marked a significant turning of the tide. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein's report to Hitler lamented, the considerable weakening of our combat strength, particularly in armored units, which had been the spearhead of earlier German successes. Following the twin victories at Belgorod and Kharkov, the Red Army's strategic gains proved not merely territorial, but psychological and material as well. The liberation of these cities galvanized Soviet morale and generated substantial civilian support, crucial for sustaining war efforts on such a massive scale. Moreover, the recapture of key regions enabled the recovery of critical resources, notably the coal mines in the Donbass basin, essential for fueling the Soviet war machine. The broader impacts on the Eastern Front were profound and immediate. The Soviet victories directly influenced subsequent operations, particularly the Lower Dnieper Offensive and Operation Bagration, which would later liberate Belarus and substantial portions of Poland. The weakening of German Army Group South exposed a cascade of strategic vulnerabilities, enabling Soviet forces to advance deeper into occupied territories with growing confidence and diminishing resistance. German military strategy, meanwhile, faced an existential crisis of adaptation. The losses in personnel and equipment during the summer offensives dealt a blow from which the Wehrmacht never fully recovered. Historian Ian Kershaw observed that the relentless Soviet assaults had bled the German forces white, a sentiment echoed in numerous Wehrmacht communications intercepted by Soviet intelligence. The attrition warfare favored by the Soviets had effectively exhausted German capacity for sustained offensive operations, condemning them to a defensive posture for the remainder of the war. The aftermath of the Soviet counteroffensives also transformed international perceptions. Western allies, particularly the United States and the United Kingdom, began viewing the Soviet Union not merely as a beleaguered nation, but as a formidable power capable of reversing the tide against Hitler. This was reflected in increased material support under Lend-Lease agreements, which saw a significant surge in supplies and equipment flowing to the Soviet Union following the 1943 victories. The strategic consequences proved equally significant on the home front. Reports from soldiers who fought in these battles, preserved in Soviet archives, reflect a renewed conviction in victory. Captain Ivan Petrov, in a letter home, wrote, "For the first time, I felt the war could be won. We were no longer merely defending, we were reclaiming our land." This sentiment spread throughout the ranks, instilling renewed determination that would carry through to subsequent offensives. In conclusion, the successful Soviet counteroffensives of 1943 proved pivotal not only in recovering lost ground, but in establishing the foundation for a broader strategic transformation. The German army was left reeling from these defeats, which directly accelerated their gradual yet irreversible decline on the Eastern Front. As the Red Army marched westward, the balance of power had clearly shifted, setting the stage for what would ultimately become the collapse of Nazi control in Eastern Europe. The strategic implications of these Soviet victories extended far beyond immediate military outcomes, fundamentally reshaping the entire course of the Second World War in the East. The Soviet counteroffensives, Operations Kutuzov and Rumyantsev, not only marked a decisive shift in control of the Eastern Front, but laid the strategic groundwork that would ultimately accelerate Nazi Germany's destruction. The aftermath of these operations left the Wehrmacht permanently crippled, having lost nearly 500,000 men, a catastrophic blow from which they never recovered. The Red Army, pushing westward, began liberating occupied territories, signaling a turning point that would lead to the eventual fall of Berlin in 1945. The immense sacrifices made by Soviet forces during these counteroffensives can't be overstated. In Operation Kutuzov, for example, the Soviets deployed over 1.3 million troops, a staggering number that underscores the scale and desperation of the conflict. The human cost was devastating, with civilian and military casualties reaching into the millions. Soviet soldier Ivan Petrov in a letter home dated August 1943, wrote movingly of the rivers of blood shed in battle, but also of the unbending will of the people that he witnessed. This narrative of sacrifice and determination became a cornerstone of Soviet and later Russian national identity and memory. The heroism displayed by Soviet soldiers wasn't only instrumental in their military victories, but served as a crucial element in the broader narrative of the war. The tenacity of the Red Army during these offensives provided the Soviet Union with moral authority in the post-war era. Stories of individual and collective heroism, like legendary sniper Lyudmila Pavlichenko, who recorded 309 confirmed kills, or the relentless defense at critical positions by vastly outnumbered forces, became integral to Soviet legacy and helped forge a powerful tradition of resilience and valor. After the war, the Soviet Union deliberately cultivated the memory of these offensives. Monuments and memorials, such as the colossal Motherland Call statue in Volgograd, formerly Stalingrad, serve as enduring reminders of the sacrifices made. Annually, Victory Day on May the 9th transforms into a profound national observance, reflecting on both the sorrow and pride derived from these monumental battles. In contemporary Russia, this legacy is preserved and promoted through education and public discourse, frequently emphasizing the narrative of a heroic Soviet Union standing against Nazi aggression. Operations Kutuzov and Rumyantsev also carried significant implications for military tactics and strategy. The operations marked a fundamental departure from previous defensive approaches employed by the Soviets, showcasing a shift toward large-scale offensive maneuvers, requiring complex coordination between multiple army fronts. The success of these operations influenced subsequent Soviet military tactics throughout World War II and were studied extensively in military academies around the world. The legacy of these offensives is twofold: a story of immense human suffering and extraordinary heroism. The strategic victories achieved during the summer of 1943 not only blunted Nazi offensive capabilities, but elevated the Soviet Union's position as a dominant military power in the post-war world. The operations reshaped not only the military landscape, but the geopolitical contours of the 20th century, contributing to the emergence of the Soviet Union as a superpower in the bipolar world that followed. This complex legacy continues to influence Russian military and political thinking, as well as its historical narrative, presenting the Soviet role in World War II as pivotal in the defeat of Nazi Germany and a testament to national strength and sacrifice. Such reflections ensure that the significance of the Red Tide, the Soviet counteroffensive, remains a defining chapter in the annals of World War II history. Remembered for its strategic brilliance and the indomitable spirit of the Red Army, the Soviet counteroffensives of 1943 weren't merely military maneuvers, but a turning point that signaled the beginning of the end for Nazi dominance on the Eastern Front. Operations Kutuzov and Rumyantsev stand as monumental testaments to strategic planning and the unconquerable spirit of the Soviet people. If you enjoyed this story, hit the subscribe button for more fascinating historical deep dives every week. Thanks for watching.